Thanks for joining us this morning. Today we're going to run through our P6-QA tool. I'm Nicole Jardin and I'm coming to you from Calgary. I'm the founder and CEO of Emerald, and with me today to help answer questions, help make sure I keep on the right track is Sue Hopkins, and she's coming to you from Wyoming. Now, let's first talk about what is quality. Okay, so what is quality? What does QA related to schedule actually mean? So we're going to jump into that. And it's one of the most common struggles, really, to get a schedule that you're confident in, that will help the team manage the project and drive to the appropriate end dates. So we're trying to look at dates, using the right resources. So you've got to work with the equipment, the team members that you've got, and you've got to, of course, try and stay within the budget that the project has to work with. So these are very common struggles, and how do you do that? How do you feel confident in the schedule that you're going to meet those objectives? Not easy, especially something that's reliable and consistent. And if you're part of a group that manages a portfolio and has a lot of projects on the go, you've got lots of different players, it's very, very challenging because a quality schedule is always something that's hotly debated. Even when we're putting QA together with our clients, the metrics that we're measuring and how we're going to measure them is always very, very hotly debated. So makes for good conversation, not so easy to model when the requirements can be very, very varied. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a quick question here, just to see kind of the different scenarios you've been in. So I'm curious, do you receive schedules from other players? So contractors, engineering companies, that sort of thing, because that really does change the dynamic of what you need to do. So I'm going to put the poll question up. If you want to answer it, go ahead. I'll share the results in a minute or two, and give whoever wishes to go ahead and answer. So I'll go ahead and share it. Of course, it depends on the role that you're playing. Okay, if you're a contractor, generally you may not be receiving schedules from others. But if you're an owner or an engineering firm who's critiquing, you will quite often be receiving schedules from others. And that is important because you need to be able to review those schedules, critique them quickly, and make sure that the feedback gets back to the contractor, engineering firms quickly and clearly so that they know what improvements are required. So this is one of the main drivers that we found when we put P6QA together. We wanted to make sure that the communication of the areas of weakness were very clear. So we're going to focus on that today. I'm going to show it to you. We also wanted our clients to be able to add additional checks. So checks that go beyond checking the logic in the schedule, whether you've got finish to starts, whether you've got leads, lags, whether you're using constraints. So things that went beyond that, because there's a lot more things that make a schedule usable than just those kind of criteria. So that was important to us, that we model business processes. So you're able to go beyond just the schedule critiquing. So things like activity naming conventions, or whether you're using activity codes that are mandatory. So we don't have that in P6, but everyone always asks for it. And so far we're still on the wish list, but we have built in something that lets you check for mandatory codes. Now that was important when we put this tool together, and so was helping our clients move away from having always to rely on third-party consultants to help do a critique of their schedule. So it's something that we still do as part of our business, but we did not feel happy that they had to bring us in for a short amount of time, and then they weren't necessarily left with the tools to continue to do those processes on their own. So that truly was the driving force behind putting P6QA together, was to give our clients the ability to do a lot more self-critiquing on an ongoing basis, from the lead scheduler, maybe the more senior schedulers, right down to the younger, more junior schedulers or new folks on the team, so that they could do a better job. And then only on the more odd occasion, or maybe during a risk analysis, would we get involved to help do the critiquing. Okay. That was another big one, actually, is just about every risk analysis that we got engaged to perform. The biggest issue was critiquing the schedule and getting the schedule where you could actually use it. So that was a whole other big driver for us to put P6QA together. Now, I'm going to jump into some of the benefits, but before I do that, I'm going to ask just another question, because I'm always curious. How do you check schedule quality right now? So some of the clients we work with, before they got QA, they had an Excel spreadsheet that they would put some metrics in. They would hire someone like us to help them do a critique, usually only on their larger schedules. They have maybe a third-party tool, another tool that generally very, very expensive tool, and only the seniors were allowed to use. Or you don't really check them. I mean, you look at the critical path, but beyond that, you don't really do any heavy analysis. So those are sort of the common ones. So if you want to go ahead and put some answers in there, we can share these. We've got a few answers in, so I'll go ahead and show some results. Okay, yeah, so pretty common answers. Those are the 4 most common things that we find. And then the other thing I want to ask before we jump into some of the benefits is how often. So what we found generally is people might critique at the beginning because they've got to do a schedule, a gate review, and they do some critiquing at the beginning, and then it falls apart. But what we wanted to make sure you could do with QA is continue on after every update. So just kind of curious, the experience of the participants today. Okay, I'll give it one more second and then we'll keep going. Okay, we got a few answers in, so I'll go ahead and share it. Okay, good. So, these are the common struggles, and what I think you're going to find after I show the tool to you is QA is not something that you only need to use once. It is built right in to P6, so you can use it all the time, several times a day, once every week, every few weeks if you're getting schedules in. So really the idea was to bake it into your day-to-day standard operating procedures so that you get the best benefit and you get that ongoing self-critiquing ability to improve how you're doing scheduling every day, not just when it's a big, high-profile project. So let's look at, first and foremost, what are the different pieces that you're going to want to critique when you've got a schedule. So most people use P6 definitely to do dates. So their date management, timeline management. So schedule is always part of just about every standard critique metric out there in the different quality groups. So AAC, PMI, and so on. That always includes logic. That always includes durations. Usually always includes constraints as well. Now, when we're looking at constraints, we're looking at hard and soft constraints. Okay, so those would be the must finish ons versus the finish on or after type of constraints. So there's 2 different styles, if you will, and those are tagged as hard and soft constraints. And then the next layer is usually resource and cost. So what a few years ago, Oracle did a bit of a survey from their clients, and they found that 60 to 70% of the folks using P6 also did resourcing, and 30 to 40% in that range use it also for costs. Okay, so those two layers do need to be part of your quality metrics if you're using them, for sure. And we'll run through some examples. And then, of course, on updating, we don't want to do this once at the beginning of the schedule development and then drop it. We don't want to do that. We want to keep critiquing as we go. So P6QA helps with many different standards out in the industry. DCMA is probably the most widely used. Government Accountability Office is the one that we've had all the time, but we've formally added some of the notebooks and some of the layouts just so you can get the idea of how you could respond to their critiquing. AAC and PMI as well have standards, and QA meets all of those, and probably many others that are out there. So we've also taken a stab at the naval air in this version as well. Now, as I mentioned, it goes well beyond that. So we do business process analysis as well, and we've got a lot that have been added from a variety of different clients, right down to calendar metrics, activity naming, activity ID conventions. I mentioned the mandatory codes. I'll show you step monitoring, resource monitoring, expense monitoring, and so on. So you can add your own business processes quite easily to the system. Takes maybe 2 to 4 hours at most to program an additional one, maybe up to a day if it's something awfully complicated. So you can expand the elements you want to measure very easily with P6QA. So that really makes the tool very flexible, and it helps you with the different kinds of projects that you might do within your team, whether they're capital projects, operational projects, shutdown, turnaround, or outage type projects. You can put metrics in that make sense for those different types of projects. Also, IT projects, or even very long range, maybe multi-decade type projects as well. Now, it also allows you to introduce standards at different phases. Okay, so when you're at early phases, your schedule may not be quite as robust or as detailed. So the way you want to monitor at those phases of the project versus once it's approved and you're in execution, they can be different. So you can change the metrics that you're measuring at different stages as well. Okay, so I'm about to jump into the software and show it live. Now, before I do that, the way that we work P6QA is very simple. So we develop the list of criteria. We input the validation for the criteria. We run the analysis, and then you can go ahead right into the system and start fixing the problem, okay? So very simple, meant to be used on a daily basis as you're working P6, not just some one-off thing that you do once a year. Then you can rerun the analysis, and you can take snapshots so you can monitor improvements over time. Okay, so you want to see that the schedule development is improving. If you use our data warehouse to snapshot into, you can then get a whole variety of awesome, very useful and informative reports that you can drive within the team of schedulers, out to third parties, out to your client, out to the contractors, engineering companies providing these schedules. Okay, so that snapshotting process is very handy, allows you to really build reports into many systems. Okay, so if you use things like Tableau, Power BI, Business Objects, Oracle Data Visualization, BI Publisher, you name it, the warehouse can work with it. And so that really kind of takes scheduling just out of the hands of the scheduling team and really makes it much more of a living, breathing record that is useful for the team to manage the project, not just something that they're doing on the side and then doing a completely different thing in the field. And then you can get these reports out even into Word. Okay, so we've automated that process. It can build it right out into Word. And again, you can share the information. So that's really the whole point of doing all this scheduling. It's to make the schedule reliable, consistent, and usable on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so I'm going to jump into showing the software tool live in P6, and I'm going to use P6 in the client for the demonstration. But if you use P6 Web, all the same features, functionality exist up in P6 Web. Okay, so let me explain kind of what you're looking at. So I'm starting in the P6 project window, and what you're looking at is essentially a dashboard of many projects that have had P6QA run on it. And these are the metrics, the validation points that we're looking at. So we're just taking advantage of P6, a lot of just basic out-of-the-box functionality of P6 with user fields, with flagging, so these different flags that's available in P6. And we're using layouts to give you a very quick way of seeing how your schedule is doing very, very easily. Now, we have certain metrics here in the layout, and you can see some of them don't look so great. We've got some red stop signs, and then some are looking good. We've got some green check marks. Okay, so we're monitoring a variety of things. We're looking at durations, we're looking at float, we're looking at a whole bunch of different logic criteria. Okay, so whether we've got open ends, whether we've got leads and lags, and whether those are long. And we'll touch on how we're deciding long leads and lags in a minute. We're also seeing whether the logic is the type that we're hoping for. Okay, so we're looking at whether they're finish to starts, whether they're start to finishes. So we're looking at the kind of logic. And of course, we're looking at whether we've decided to use constraints. Okay. Now, you do not want constraints in your schedule. Best practice is to avoid them as much as possible, and you want to keep them to a very limited amount. Otherwise, it's a picture. It is not a schedule. Okay, so that's why that's an important piece when you're looking at schedule quality. And then, of course, if you're looking at resources and costs, you're going to want to see how you're doing on that. So this is letting me know that I've got some activities missing resources, and I want to fill that gap. Okay. Now, schedules can be works in progress, so you can't expect absolutely every flag to be green the first day you're building a schedule. But you will have some gates that you've got to hit, and you've got to make sure you're improving on these. So this is why having a dashboard live right with you working in P6 is fantastic. Instead of having to give your schedule to your senior lead who goes into a very expensive third-party software tool, does a critique and then gives it back and says, fix the stuff. Okay, that's not the best practice approach for anyone to be able to improve their skills and self-evaluate. So that's really why we've driven QA right into P6. So we've got the schedule metrics, and I'm also going to show you how the metrics were put together. Okay, so what makes it red, what makes it green, and in some cases you're going to see a yellow warning. What feeds all that? So we have a criteria layout. This criteria layout feeds how the flagging is working in the results layout. So we're letting it know what constitutes a high duration, and these are in hours, okay? So 960 hours. I can't do math. Divided by 40 on average, that'll give you or 8 on average, I guess, would give you the number of days. Okay, so everything in P6 in the back end is in hours. So that's why these criteria are put in hours. So it would be the float. Now, so those are metrics that have not only a hit, but it also has a parameter, if you will. So we're measuring not only whether it was something with float, but we're also measuring how big the float is. Now, some of these metrics are just measuring how many pass or fail the criteria. And a pass or fail could be without any balance on either side. So in this case, we're saying if the logic is missing, if there's an open end as a predecessor, there's an open end on a successor, that's a fail. There's no wiggle room, if you will. And we have 0% tolerance for that, okay? Now, next to it, we've said if there is a lag, and it's a long lag, so long lag in this case is 40 hours, which is 1 week. Anything with a long lag, as long as it's 2% or less of the tasks, we'll give it a green check mark. Okay, so that would be 2 out of 100. If we have 3 out of 100, it would get a red X. Okay, so you can define what your tolerance is, and that tolerance can change over the life of the project. So when you're early days, building your schedule out, you can certainly set these a little higher. Once you're closer to execution, you can set them to 0 tolerance. Okay, so that's something you guys can do within your scheduling group, come up with the criteria and the standards, and use those throughout your business process review. Okay, so that's how they get into the previous window that I was in. So that's what's controlling this flagging. Okay, so very, very easy to use. Set up the metrics you want for the criteria you want, and then run the system and it'll do all the flagging. Now we're looking at the flagging rolled up to the project level. The flagging goes right down to the activities, the resources, the steps, the expenses. So the flagging goes deep into the tool, and then we roll it up using our P6 calculator functionality to get those roll-ups onto the main screen. Okay, so you can see them at the top level. You can get some coaching if you need it from your senior scheduler, because they can see, oh, you've got a lot of lags. Maybe you're not clear on what the lags are. They can give you some over-the-shoulder coaching, and then you can go and clean it up. Okay, so that's the whole point of the QA tool, is to make it really livable, usable for you. And then you can see where those lags are, and you can see them right on the activities. So I'll show you that in a minute. Now, before I jump into the details, I wanted to show you the additional reporting that we've got right live on the screen. We have notebooks that enhance these top-level metrics. So these notebooks are broken into many different ones. And as I mentioned, we've created the Government Accountability Office notebook as an example here in our demo database. So that particular metric and standard is best practice standard. They've got 1 through 10 best practices that they're going after. Some are more tangible than others, and those are the ones we've included in here. Now, if you wanted to build your own for capturing all activities and measuring activities, counts, and durations, those can be added as well. Okay, so this is not the only thing that you can have if you're trying to meet the Government Accountability Office standard. Open ends. So I mentioned if there's missing predecessor, successor, we're looking at that. So it's telling us we've got 32 activities in the schedule. So it's just that are in play here. And out of those, we've got 8 that are having an open end. So we're going to go in and look at those, and we'll touch on how you can see them in more detail. Now, I can see them in more detail here as well. And so that gives me a great ability to report on this, because this stuff can be cut and paste into other systems, including emailing it out. So you can cut and paste this whole report, send it to your contractor to let them know, hey, we've got some issues here. You've got to get them fixed up. We need them fixed up within a day, whatnot. Okay, so very, very strong ability to report out off of the tool. So we go into depth in every one of these metrics, explaining the issue, the summary of the issue, if you will, and some of the detail. Okay. Now, if you've got a lot of issues, we do chop off the list, and you've got to go into the activities for a bit more. But this is a very, very strong starting point that you can then use with your communication to the contractor. And you can see we've got a bunch of others as well. Okay, so we can create these very readily. So if there's something that you want and you need it built, we can do that very, very readily. Okay. Okay, so let's actually go in to a schedule here, and let's open it up and let's run it so you could see how you would work with this system. So I'm actually going to go ahead and run this manually. So you can see that I'm saying this project I want to run P6QA on. So it's just a tag, yes, no. If I want it to run it on a regular basis, so it could be daily, weekly, monthly, or as you can see here, manual. So I'm going to actually manually run it. Now that is an excellent way if you're going to wait for a new project update to come in, and then you're going to run it. So that would be the way to handle that. So I set that one to yes, and I want it to run. And so I'm just going to tell it to go ahead and run right now by clearing out the last run date and just refreshing it so the database knows what I'm asking it to do, and off it goes, and it's going to run. And we should see some flags come in here in a minute. So I can just refresh this and it'll, yeah, okay, there you go. It's pretty quick. It's a very small schedule. So now I can see kind of where my problem areas lie. Okay, so it looks very heavily related to logic. So I can open up that project, which I've got it open. I can then go into my activities, and then I would have a layout that I'm going to have a handful of layouts that I will use in parallel to the master layouts on the project window. So the first one, of course, is going to be the logic. So I've got that logic right here on the screen. So this layout, we've grouped it by activity type, okay? Because we know the logic building for a finish milestone versus a level of effort versus start or task dependent will be different. So this was just for ease of use to look at logic. So a finish milestone, not surprisingly, might have an open end as a successor. Okay? It's the end of a sequence. Usually there's nothing that comes after it. Thus, an open end is not that unexpected. So it's what we might call a false positive in this case. Okay, so yes, it's true, it's not meeting the criteria, but it's reasonable. So the way P6QA works is we're allowed to override a false positive, if you will. So I'm actually going to say it's all right that that has open end on the successor. Now, in conjunction with that, you can have a notebook that lets you put a note in saying why you did that. Okay, now not every one of these requires a note. Some of them are more obvious than others. Okay, so because the successor was left open, which is reasonable for a finished milestone, logic missing also failed. So I might actually want to say both of these criteria are okay. Okay. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that. You can use this one only So those are your choices, but I'm going to do that so you can see how we can critique ourselves and then rerun the analysis, and you'll see some of the improvements taking place. Okay, so because we've got an open end, there could be some high floats on here. That may be legit, and we that might be something that we want to flag, but I'm going to leave that because I don't want to accidentally perhaps hide a high float problem. Okay, so that one I want to make sure is still warning me, and I'll address it afterwards. Okay, so same sort of thing for start milestones. Not very surprising that maybe there's a predecessor missing. Okay, so again, you can blue star that, and in this case, I'm going to blue star both. Okay, so that's just to give you a quick idea on how you can handle those. Now, this is a real activity. And this whoops, why does it do that? Sometimes it does this, it just clears the activity. Let me just try and refresh that. There we go. So this truly is showing that we're missing a successor. I can't read that. Let's read it down here. So this engineering work package is missing. So that is truly missing a successor, and that's not good. So we would want to definitely fix that. So engineering usually would come before engineering work package 2 would come before the construction, the shipping. So you would definitely want to hook up that, and probably comes before the fabrication. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a link to that. Okay, so again, this is very simple. Build the logic. We're going to reschedule that real quick. I'm going to rerun it real quick. So I'm just going to clear this out. And I'm going to rerun it. Now, I don't expect that I've addressed every single one of these issues, but I've addressed a few of them. And I should start to see some improvements. Perhaps not at this level, right? Depending on all the issues that I've got inside that schedule. But certainly down on the lower level activities, I'll see it. Okay, so I think it's probably just because I didn't tackle quite enough of them, but I should start to see it coming through here. Good, so I think this one, whoops, why is it doing that? It's, okay, let's just see. Okay, good, so I think it was, where was that one? I think it was a high float. Let's just rerun it. May still have high float because, of course, if I've tied it into other activities that still haven't tied together. So it looks like I've missed a few, right? So the work package is done, the review should be done, the release. Looks like I've missed some logic in here. So I'm gonna have to keep working until I get these cleared out. Okay, so very easy to do. In P6, I can link these. Again, I can rerun the schedule. I can rerun the analysis and just keep working progressively to get these logic ties cleaned up. Okay, so I can do this as many times as I wish and just keep running it and keep working on these. Okay, so it looks like these are starting to clean up, which is good. So we're cleaning up some of these missing successors, predecessors, which is what you want. You just want to keep progressively working on it and clearing out the issues. Okay, so we're trying to get rid of that high float, of course. That usually implies that your logic is not quite where it needs to be, and you've got some open ends that you need to work on. Okay, so that's progressively how you want to keep working on it. And again, it's a work in progress. So that's one layer. So let's touch on business processes. Okay, so I'm opening that and I'm going to go back and look at my business process layout. Okay, so what you do is you marry these layouts up. So you've got one at the upper level, one at the lower level, and you can get into resources, steps, and expenses as well. So there's lots of different things you can monitor at the business process level. Some of the common ones that we've done for our clients is looking at activity naming conventions, activity ID formats, those mandatory codes that I was mentioning. So we want to see whether or not we've got mandatory codes that we've said need to be used on this project and whether we've tagged them all. Okay, so in this case, they have been tagged. In this case, some of them are still missing. If we're using resources, do we want to use the primary resources? Do we want to use cost accounts? If we're using cost accounts and we're using costs on the expenses, we usually want to use the expense categories. And if we're using steps, we want to make sure that we're using steps on the physical percent complete type activities. Okay, so these are all additional features that you may not have explored using in P6 because you thought they were too hard to work with and make sure they were being used well. That's another thing that we found with QA is it enhances people's ability to use all the different parts of P6. So these are things we're monitoring, and in monitoring them, we want to flag them inside the software. So we want to see whether or not the activity ID format is valid or not. So in this example, these ones are good. So we've obviously got a format that's including letter number, a dash, 3 letters, dash, and 3 numbers. Now, these milestones were allowing a different format. Okay, so it's violating the activity ID, but again, we can do the essentially whitelisting of it, if you will, by using the override with the blue star. Okay, so you can use that in all the validations. So it really makes it very, very flexible to have some standards, but allow some overrides, some things that don't meet the standards exactly. Okay, so you've got that flexibility built in to the way that we run it. Now let's touch on the resources. Okay, so if you're using resources and if you use team member, some of the criteria for updating might be the primary resource is allowed to do the updating. So if you haven't checked the primary resource here, you're going to have the indicator right here on the activity level, letting you know that the primary resource has been missed. Okay, now that's important because you won't get the right updating sent into team member if you use it. Also, many people use the primary resource for various layouts. Okay, so this is a very nice way to know that you've got some missed. Another key one is roles. So a lot of our clients not only use resources, but they also have roll-ups for various reporting. And in version 21, I should say, they added the ability, 20 or 21, I'm not sure. In any case, definitely the latest version. They added the ability to do limits on roles. They've allowed the ability to do role codes. So they've really enhanced the role capability in the latest versions of P6 so that you can do different analysis at that role level much, much easier. So this is an important one, and you can see here that I'm missing the role. So I'd want to get those cleaned up as well so that, again, I've got a lot that I've missed the role. Cost accounts, same thing. If you're doing any cost analysis, the cost accounts bring in the resource and the expense into one. So you can analyze that much, much better and make sure it's tidy. So we've got a lot of clients who, when they're doing costing, they do take advantage of cost accounts. And then expenses. So expenses, we not only want to use cost accounts, but we usually want to use cost categories. It gives you another layer of grouping. Okay, so this is just highlighting all the problem areas in one very, very quick, easy to use area so that you can improve the way you're doing your scheduling. Now, I mentioned the mandatory codes. Okay, so one of our mandatory codes is this code called responsibility. And we're tagging it as mandatory with this very simple naming convention. So it's the asterisk with 2 brackets. Any of our codes within the system that have that on them are set as mandatory. Okay, so I can see very quickly by looking throughout the software, and I've got a lot of codes in this demo database, but you can see that we've got a variety of them that have been flagged as mandatory. So this will highlight all of them in the QA tool. Sorry, I should probably just search for an asterisk. That would probably do the trick. No, not going to do it. Anyway, you can see that we've got the responsibility there. So we got to get that filled in, right? So we've got to assign these to clear out that metric that's showing a red stop sign, okay? Now that's really hugely important when you're using these codes for a variety of reports, for any dashboarding that you're doing out in third party as well. If you're missing codes, you're not going to get the right reporting, okay? So that's really important, and this is allowing you to set some mandatory values. Okay, good. So what you would do is you'd continue to do the cleanup, and then you would run this again. And whoops, sorry, you could run it again from here, just like I showed you before. You can run it manually by clearing the flag, rerunning the analysis, and again, it will start to hopefully move these out of the red into the green, and that way you know you're continually improving on this metric. I probably didn't clear enough of them. We saw quite a few with primary resource missing, roles missing, and so on. Okay, so you just got to keep working that process and hope moving these into the green zone. Now, last thing I want to walk through. I want to walk through, not only is this tool useful for when you're building your schedule, but when you're updating your schedule. So I'm going to move to an updating monitoring layout, which we've got built. So we've got an updating layout up at the top, and I'm going to use this other project that has some updates already in it so that we can see it kind of live. So I'm going to run it, and I'm going to clear that out. So I'm going to go ahead and run it, and we'll see where we've got some problem areas. So typical things that you want to monitor when you get an update. You want to monitor durations. You want to see what's happening with them. Are the durations getting bigger, the remaining durations getting bigger than the original duration? Is the actual duration getting bigger than the budgeted duration? So we want to monitor those. We want to make sure that we're understanding where things are going astray. We want to monitor dates, obviously, finish dates. Are they going late? And yes, I can see that my durations are getting longer. My dates are getting later in some cases. So those are things we want to understand. If we're using resources and updating resources, do we have activities that have started, but the resources have not been progressed? That could show that we have missed some updating. So that's a really important metric. We also want to look at whether we've got any strange updates. Okay, so if we've got a data date of today, but our updates show an actual date in a month from now, that's likely a typing error that's come in. So that's what some of these are going to allow us to take a look at, whether some of our actual dates don't make any sense. We also want to see activities that should have been updated, but didn't. okay? Because we want to make sure it wasn't just a mistake in the updating process. So this dashboard gives you a great starting point on where problems exist, okay? And then I can go to my married up matching layout down in the activities, and I can go look at those. Okay, so this is letting me know I've got some different problems in different parts of this. So I'm just going to touch on a few of them, and then I'll rerun it, and you'll get an idea of how this can work. Okay, so I've got a few activities that are in progress, and I can see that some of the durations, let's say my duration was going long, okay? And let's say my start date on the activity was, I'm gonna do it the way most people update. So my start date is been captured here. So let's just check the data date on this, 23rd of June, okay? So this start date is ahead, which is great. But let's say this start date was after. Sorry, let me do it down here. Let's just say my start date was after. Okay, so that's one of the ones that would be flagged. Now, I can do it on a new activity as well. Okay, so let's say my start date is way after. So this is like coming up 2 years from now, way after. So that would likely be just a typing error. Okay, so I'll go ahead and run that just to give you a feel for how these work. Now I'll jump over here to activate it again. And I'll get it going, and then I'll jump back to my activity window. And these are some of the activities that I updated. So I'll just refresh that. Okay, so here you go. Here's an example. So you can see it live, that it's monitoring it and flagging that something doesn't make sense here, which was fairly obvious. The actual start date is 2 years in the future. Likely it's a mistake that I made in typing. And that happens. It happens a lot, and you want to monitor it, okay? So this gives you an immediate flag. I can go ahead and fix that and run it again, and off you go, okay? Now, some of the other things you want to monitor whether I haven't updated my resources. So I started the activity, but you can see I have no actual units that have been assigned to it. So this is a handy flag to go and get the updates from the team. So whoever should be doing this work. Okay, so you can go and get the updates from them. Make sure that you're not missing some of your data. The last thing you want to do is say that you've updated the schedule only to find out you've missed a bunch of information. Okay, so this is super handy, not only on the upfront critiquing, but on the ongoing critiquing that you need to do. Okay, so again, that plays into the government of accountability, quality metrics. They've got quality metrics on updating the schedule on a regular basis. It's their best practice, item number 9. So very important piece to ongoing analysis of your schedule. Okay, so I haven't been watching the questions. So let's see if Sue, I don't know if you tackled any of them. So let's just go in and take a look at some of the questions.
I have not yet. I figured
Okay.
everybody would want to see them
Okay.
or hear them.
Okay. So let's jump in and touch on some of the questions, and then I'll do some wrap up. Okay, so one of the questions in the chat was, can we build standard task list template to validate the schedule? Yes, absolutely. So I'm a very big believer on trying to use templates. Templates will help reduce errors that you would be showing up, definitely. So yes, definitely try and use some of those standards. Now, those standards with QA can be at the project level, of course, with the criteria. So if in a turnaround situation, you have certain criteria versus a capital project. You can set those on your template when you start the project out. So that's a great way to get it going for sure. And how can we highlight the negative float activities? Okay. So negative float can be on its own a quality metric. So you don't have to just live with a large float or large float or float. You can highlight negative float explicitly. So this is on my screen right here. Now these, of course, have a positive float. So negative float can be highlighted explicitly. So let me just go ahead and put a hard constraint on this so you can see the negative float. So this activity is finishing in January. So if I put a hard constraint on it, that's earlier. Okay, so I'll just do that and I'll reschedule. So this is kind of pounding it on purpose, just so you can see it, but it'll give you the idea of how easy it is to monitor this. Okay, so I'm running it, so that should go ahead and do its thing. Yeah, so we can see it right there. Okay, so yes, that's a metric we've already got, and you can monitor it very, very quickly. And you can see by putting that one constraint, I slammed quite a few activities into negative float range. So yes, that's one you can do. During tracking, can we highlight the activities which is not respecting the logic of the relationship? So I'm not 100% sure exactly what that question is asking, but it's similar to this negative float. So when it's not respecting logic, it's usually because of a constraint. So this negative float one is working on that. And if I go back to my first layout, I don't think I have to. If I go back to my first layout, which does a lot of the logic analysis, that will probably help as well. So let's just go here and let's look at some of these. So I did put a hard constraint on, and we've got some here. I probably have a filter. Nope. So for whatever reason, that one I just put on is not hitting the hard constraint. It's probably the definition that we've got on this project is a bit different. But yes, you would see it right inside of these two constraint ones. And of course, you can put a filter right on that, right? So you create a filter if you just want to focus on those. So the sky's really the limit, which is why we chose to use P6, because you can just put all the different layouts in that you want to monitor those. Okay, so I touched on some of those. Okay, we had another question. Do we have standard wrench time for an activity to validate the duration of the activity? I'm not sure exactly what that means, like how long it would take to analyze it. I would say a good few minutes, absolutely for sure, if not longer. So we do have a little ROI chart when someone's looking at buying QA, and we have a very, very generous number that we use. We use less than a minute, and even with less than a minute, buying QA will save you thousands and thousands of dollars each year. So I think it depends on how you do your analysis, but I would say conservatively, you're looking at 5 to 10 minutes likely, and could be quite a bit longer. If you're chasing logic, it could take you hours to chase logic easily. Okay, sorry, there was a clarification on the overrides. So if you mean those overrides that I did with the star, yes, you can easily filter on those blue stars. You can easily filter on them because you can filter on these user defines. And you can create a filter that asks just for these blue stars. So yeah, you can definitely find those. And you can include them in the reports so that you can let people know that you did an override. Now, I think I did not show you the overrides do show up in these reports as well. So let's just see. Let me close the loop on that. This one should be on there. Yeah. So I didn't highlight that explicitly, but it is right here. So the overrides are included in the actual. So the actual is the total, and the override, the blue star, shows that we've taken 2 out as blue stars, or we've removed 4 as blue stars. So it lets you know when you've blue starred it, really, it's inside of these 2 metrics here, so that you can keep track of that, okay? So that if someone wanted to say, well, something you've done is not right, you can definitely explain it inside of these statistics. Okay, I think we've tackled all the questions. So I'll jump back to the PowerPoint to do the wrap up, and you can definitely ask questions one more time in that as well. Share material. Okay, so are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good. So let's just jump into a few benefits, and then I'll run through some case studies real quick, and then we can go back into questions. So really, as I've tried to explain over the presentation, is we tried to build P6QA so that critiquing schedules were not just in the hands of third-party expensive consultants like us and your senior folks. We tried to make it so it's much more of a living, breathing, day-to-day focus of the team. So we've got really great feedback that even folks that are not full-time schedulers can look at the QA information and understand what to do with it. Okay, so that's been a big win. And also trying to lighten the load, right? Many hands make light work. This is the idea, is that everyone's critiquing as we go. It also really helps raise the standard of scheduling within your team. Okay, so when I don't have to go get my lead scheduler to critique things or help me chase down the critical path every time, that too is a big win on the return on investment. Okay, you're not always having to get your most expensive people to do some of the legwork. Okay, so that's very important. And it also empowers your schedulers, right? It really empowers them much more to take on the role that they're working towards becoming experts in. In terms of the benefit on time, right? Critiquing an 8,000 activity schedule in less than a few hours, and I'm going to go through this in more detail, is very, very achievable. And I've done that. This is my client that I worked with, and I'll go into that in more detail. Being able to see that your critical path is not making sense very quickly and it's not reliable and there's gaps in it, very, very important, because of course that means that the CPM is not strong enough. Okay, so let me run through a few case studies. So that 8,000 activity schedule was a project that we did a few years ago in New York City. It was a huge multi-purpose building, and the developer did not have a scheduler on their team. So the client was the CFO, doesn't know anything about scheduling, and they were very, very budget conscious, so they didn't want to spend a lot of money. So we ran P6QA for them. As I said, it was less than 2 hours for me to run the schedule analysis to see where all the gaps were in terms of the critical path was not consistent, and then took me a few hours to explain it to the CFO so that he could go to the contractor and argue and get, a revised schedule and so on. In that scenario, there was a lot of open ends. The critical path was not reliable, and the durations were all over the place. So that gave the CFO enough to go and get a better schedule. Okay, so that the return on investment there was not even worth discussing. Like for less than a day of our time, plus paying for the QA tool, save them a ton of money on working with a schedule that was definitely not something you could work towards. Another really great example here is with a Department of Transportation in the US, our client Garver Engineering doing all their project controls for them. They use QA very, very elaborately. They have a very, very strong specification document that all contractors must work towards. They critique hundreds of schedules each month, and they're updated either weekly, every second week, or monthly. And that's a lot of critiquing to be done. So they've actually pushed the critiquing out to the team. So they've got site engineers, so construction engineers that do the preliminary critique, and if they need help, they get some coaching and extra help from the scheduling experts. They immediately produce reports for their contractors, so they've got a very objective, consistent approach across all schedules being used. And the win for them is hundreds of man hours or people hours saved every month on critiquing schedules. The collaboration that they've built with their contractors, because it's not confrontational anymore, because they can see the report come out so quickly, they know it's very, very objective. So the collaboration, the reliance on the schedule, these are huge benefits that they've received from using QA. Okay, so the benefits are there. If you're looking at how you can market this, socialize it internally with your company because you think there's value in it, we've got a return on investment chart that we can work on with you as well. And it's very, very conservative. And the numbers really do show how easy it is to get your benefit from P6QA. Okay, let's just see. I think there may be one more question that came in. How are we validating the duration of an activity? Do we have inbuilt standards for the task duration to compare? Okay, so that is a good question. So activity durations, there are some rules of thumb that you would put in, that you can put in. So you can do a duration based, as I showed you with some of those metrics that had the number of hours. So float, a big float, a big lead or lag, use the same concept. So not only do we would put in what we constitute, what we consider a long duration, okay? So a good rule of thumb is usually up to 3 times your update cycle. So in a turnaround, an outage, that might be a daily update cycle. So that might, or it might be a shift update cycle. So that could be as little as 36 hours to 3 days. In a capital project where you're updating every week or every 2 weeks or every month, that could be up to 3 months, okay? So you can set the duration that you consider a long duration on the different projects. So each project can have its own metric, okay? So that's one way you can do it. If you need to go deeper and you want to go to a WBS level, that's something that a few of our clients are looking at. So it's also something that's on our roadmap. Okay, so I tackled that question. And certainly if you have any additional questions, you can throw them in the chat and I'll tackle them as we go. So hopefully the last hour has been worthwhile, and hopefully you've seen some different things that could potentially help your team use P6 better, more consistently, more reliably, and more objectively, okay? Because if you've ever been in a schedule quality debate, you know they can get pretty heated. It's interesting how project controls people are very, very passionate about what they do. So really, that's what Emerald's been doing for the last 20, I can't believe it, 27 years that we've been a partner working on project scheduling, improving your ability to manage data through integrations, and of course, in the last probably 10 years, really bringing you tools like P6QA that help you do better with the tools that you've got. Okay, so you should really definitely check out some of our other webinars on P6 Calculator, on P6 Loader. I'm missing some, P6 Scrubber, which is a fantastic tool and going to save you tons of time. If you import schedules, save you tons of time keeping your P6 clean. Now, not only do we have P6 tools, but we've got unifier tools, we've got PCM, contract management tools, and building more and more A-Connects and Prime tools as well. Okay, so that's been our focus from the very beginning. We understand data management is not the most productive use of our time. So we've got a lot of automations, integrations, and tools like that that make your life better so you can focus on bringing more value to your company's team. So feel free to chat in any more questions. If questions come up after you want to explore the tools more, reach out to me through my email, probably is the best bet. And Sue can throw her email in there too, so you can reach out to either one of us and reach out that way. And if you want to reach out in another way, if you think there's value in continuing the conversation with some pricing or just having a meeting, just let us know, okay? We are definitely want to follow up the way that you feel is most appropriate. If you just want to keep in touch through the mailer, that's great too. So just if you want follow up, please let us know. We want to make sure we're working with you in the most appropriate manner. Okay, great. So we'll stay on the line for a minute more. I'll stop the recording here and